Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. I want to know where you are tonight. I was standing in my own kitchen, the kitchen I have cooked in for 31 years, the one with the yellow curtains I sewed myself, and the small crack in the tile near the stove that my late husband always said he'd fix and never did. When my daughter-in-law looked at me and said the words that changed everything. "Frances," she said, and she used my first name, not Mom, the way she used to before everything went sideways. "You need to stop inserting yourself into our lives. We are adults. We don't need you managing us." I was holding a casserole dish. I had driven 40 minutes to bring them dinner because she had just gone back to work after maternity leave, and I genuinely thought that showing up with a hot meal was a kind thing to do. That's what you do. That's what my mother did, and her mother before her. I set the dish down on the counter, carefully, and I didn't say a word. She took that as agreement. She smiled like she had won something. Then she called out to my son in the other room and said dinner was ready, like I wasn't even standing there anymore. I drove home in silence. 40 minutes, and somewhere around mile 20, something shifted in me. Something quiet and permanent, like a door closing very gently but with a lock. Let me back up. My son's name is Owen. He's 42 years old and he is the best thing I ever made. I don't say that lightly. His father passed 6 years ago, heart failure, sudden, on a Tuesday morning in March, and after that it was just the two of us for a while. We got close in the way that grief makes people close, the kind of closeness that feels like it will last forever. He met Paige 3 years after his father died. She was sharp, pretty, very put together, the kind of woman who always has a plan. I told myself those were good qualities, and honestly, in the beginning, I liked her. We weren't close, but we were cordial. She called me on my birthday. She asked about my garden. We were fine. They got married 2 years later. I wore a blue dress and I cried during the vows, and I meant every tear. Then my granddaughter was born, Hazel. She came into the world on a Wednesday morning, and Owen called me from the hospital parking lot crying and said, "Mom, she's perfect." I drove straight there. I held her when she was 40 minutes old. She had her father's ears and a little comma of dark hair, and I fell completely apart in the best possible way. For the first few months, things were good. I came over twice a week. I held Hazel while Paige slept. I did laundry. I made soups. I was careful not to overstep. I asked before I offered advice. I followed their routines. I bit my tongue more times than I can count. I thought we were building something. A team. But then Paige's mother moved to town. Her name is Loretta, and she is not a bad woman. I want to be fair. But she and Paige had a different vision of what family looked like, and in that vision, my role was smaller. Background. Occasional. Little things started changing. The twice-a-week visits became once a week, then once every 2 weeks, then once every 2 weeks. Then I was being scheduled like a dentist appointment. Paige would text me, not call, text, with a specific window. Sunday from 2 to 4. 2 hours with my granddaughter. I told Owen I felt like I was being managed. He sighed and said Paige was just setting boundaries. I asked him what boundary required a grandmother to see her granddaughter for 2 hours on a Sunday. He didn't have an answer. He just looked tired. I should tell you something about Owen. He is a good man, but he has always been a peacekeeper. His father was the same way. They believe that if you just stay calm and patient long enough, things will resolve themselves. Sometimes that's wisdom. Sometimes it's just waiting in a burning house hoping the fire goes out on its own. The casserole incident, as I've come to call it in my own head, happened when Hazel was about 14 months old. After that night, I went home and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I thought about what I wanted, not what I should want, not what would keep the peace, what I actually wanted. I wanted to know my granddaughter. I wanted to watch her grow up. I wanted her to know me as a real person, not a stranger she saw a few times a year at holidays. And I thought about what I had. My husband, Gerald, had been careful with money his whole life. He was an engineer, methodical, never flashy. When he died, he left me the house, paid off, and a retirement account, and a small amount of savings that I had added to carefully over the years. Nothing extraordinary. but enough. Enough to matter. I had a lawyer I trusted, a woman named Harriet who had handled Gerald's estate and who I'd kept in touch with since. I called her the week after the casserole incident, and I said, I need to talk to you about something I've been thinking about for a while. I had been thinking about setting up something for Hazel's future. A college fund, maybe. Or something more structured. Gerald and I had talked about it before he got sick, in the vague way you talk about things you think you have more time for. After he died, I let it sit. Now, I was ready. Harriet walked me through the options. A 529 plan for education, a UTMA account, or a trust, more formal, more controlled, with specific conditions on when and how the money could be accessed. Who do you want managing it if something happens to you? She asked. Not Owen, I said. And then I felt terrible for saying it, because it wasn't about Owen. It was about who Owen would be under pressure. I mean, I trust Owen, but I don't trust the situation. Harriet nodded like she had heard this before. Then we name a co-trustee, she said. Someone independent. I thought about my sister Claudia. She lives in Phoenix. She's 70 years old and sharp as a tack, and she has no patience for nonsense. I called her that evening. She said yes before I finished explaining. The trust was set up 6 weeks later. It named Hazel as the beneficiary. It included funds for education, medical emergencies, and a distribution at 25. Claudia was named co-trustee alongside me. Owen was not a trustee. Neither was Paige. I didn't tell them right away. That was a deliberate choice. Harriet advised transparency, and I knew she was right, but I also knew that the moment I told Paige, the nature of our relationship would change again. I wanted to do it when I was ready, and when I had thought carefully about how. That moment came sooner than I expected. 3 weeks after the trust was finalized, Paige called me. Not a text, a call. That alone told me something was different. Frances, she said, same tone as always. Owen mentioned you'd been talking to a lawyer. Owen had mentioned it because I had mentioned it to Owen. Not the details, just that I was getting my estate documents in order, which at 68 seemed reasonable. He brought it up to Paige the way he brought up most things, casually, trying to be open. I have, I said. Can I ask what you're planning? There was something in her voice. Not warmth, more like alertness. The way a person sounds when they're trying to figure out something that affects them. I'm making sure my affairs are in order, I said, in case something happens to me. Does it involve Hazel? I paused. I love Hazel. Of course it involves Hazel. Owen and I should be part of any decisions about her future. You're her parents, I said. You make the decisions about how she's raised. This is about what I leave behind. That's my decision. The silence stretched out. I'd appreciate being kept in the loop, she said finally. I'll talk to Owen, I said, and I ended the call. That weekend I drove over and I talked to my son. I told him I had set up a trust for Hazel. I explained the basics: education, medical, distribution, at 25. I told him Claudia was co-trustee. I watched his face. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's really generous, Mom. I want her to have something from her grandfather too," I said. "This is what Gerald would have wanted." Owen nodded. He looked a little emotional. Owen nodded. He looked a little emotional. I could tell he meant it. Then Paige walked in. She had been in the next room. I don't know if she was listening or if the timing was coincidence. She looked at Owen first, then at me. "You already set it up," she said. "Yes, without talking to us. It's my money," I said. "And my estate planning," I told Owen as soon as it was finalized. "We should have been consulted." Her voice was very controlled. The kind of controlled that takes practice. "Paige," I said as calmly as I could, "you told me to stop inserting myself into your lives. I took that seriously. My estate is my life. I handled it the way I saw fit." She left the room. Owen gave me a look that was half apology, half exhaustion. I squeezed his hand and said goodbye. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. About a month later, I got a call from the financial institution where the trust account was held. The woman on the phone was professional, careful with her words. She told me someone had called earlier that week asking about the account. asking about access, asking what documentation would be needed to modify the trust beneficiary designations. Who called? I asked. She couldn't tell me by name, but she confirmed the caller had identified themselves as a family member of the account holder. I called Harriet immediately. She contacted the institution and flagged the account with additional verification requirements, security questions, a callback protocol, documentation that could only be authorized by me or Claudia. She also sent a formal letter making clear the account's legal structure and that no modifications could be made without both trustees. Francis, Harriet said, before we hung up, you should know that what was attempted wasn't illegal. Calling and asking questions isn't a crime, but it tells you something about intent. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be honest with you about this part, because it would be easy to tell this as a story where I felt righteous and clear-headed the whole way through. I didn't. I sat at my kitchen table that evening and I cried. Not angry crying, sad crying, because I had spent 3 years trying to be a good mother-in-law, trying to respect their space and follow their rules and show up with casseroles and love and patience. And somewhere in all of that, the relationship had become something I didn't recognize, something that involved phone calls to financial institutions about a trust fund set up for a 2-year-old's future. I thought about Gerald. He would have known what to say. He always did. He had this way of reducing things to their simplest form. What do you actually need? He'd ask. Not what do you want, not what's fair, not what's complicated. What do you actually need? What I needed was to know Hazel. That was it. That was the whole thing. 2 weeks after the bank incident, Owen called me. He sounded different, flatter, more careful. He said Paige had told him she'd called the trust institution just to understand the account structure better. He said it like he was reading from a script someone else had written. Owen, I said, look at me. He laughed a little, the way you do when someone says something that only works in person. Mom, I know you love her. I know she's your wife and you're trying to hold everything together. I have watched you do that your whole life, and I love you for it. But I need you to hear me when I tell you this. The trust is not changing. Hazel will have that money when she's 25. Whatever else happens between any of us, that part is done. He was quiet. I'm not your enemy, I said. I'm not trying to control anyone. I'm just an old woman who wants to know her granddaughter and make sure her future is secure. That's all I've ever been trying to do. Owen cried a little. He tried to hide it. He sounds exactly like his father when he cries. He came to see me the following Saturday. Alone. We sat in the backyard, the same place his father and I used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings, and we talked for 3 hours. He told me things he hadn't said before. That Paige felt insecure around me. Felt like she could never measure up. Like I was always quietly judging her. That her own mother had told her to get control of the situation early in the marriage. That he had been so exhausted trying to manage everyone's feelings that he'd stopped managing his own. I listened. I didn't defend myself. I didn't tell him he was wrong, even when I thought he was. And then I said, Owen, I don't want to manage you. I want to have Sunday coffee with you and watch Hazel learn to talk. That's the life I want. He nodded. He reached over and took my hand the way he used to when he was small, and we were crossing a street. Things didn't change overnight. I want to be honest about that too. There was no dramatic scene where Paige apologized and we hugged and everything was resolved. Real life doesn't move that way. But Owen started calling more. He started bringing Hazel to see me without it being a scheduled window. Small things. Hazel had learned to say Grandma Frances. She couldn't quite get the Frances part. It came out more like Gamma Fram. And the first time I heard it, I had to go into the bathroom for a minute and collect myself. Paige and I had a conversation about 6 weeks after Owen's Saturday visit. She came alone, which surprised me. She sat at my kitchen table and she didn't make eye contact at first, and she said, I think I've been unfair to you. It was not a full apology. It was a beginning of one. And I knew from raising a child and being married for 34 years that beginnings are sometimes all you get, and what you do with them is what matters. I made us tea. I told her about Gerald, how he used to say that a family is not a thing you're born into. It's a thing you keep choosing, every day. every hard conversation, every casserole you drive 40 minutes to deliver, and every moment you bite your tongue. She listened. I think she heard me. Hazel turned 2 last spring. Owen and Paige had a small party. Backyard, family only. I arrived early, and I stayed late. I pushed Hazel on her little swing until her laughter was so big it didn't fit in her body. She fell asleep with her head on my shoulder at the end of the evening, and I sat very still so I wouldn't wake her. Owen took a photo. I have it on my refrigerator now, next to the picture of Gerald holding Owen the same way 39 years ago. The trust is still there. Harriet reviews it annually. Claudia checks in every few months. Hazel won't know about it until she's old enough to understand, and when she does, I hope she understands that it was never about money. It was about someone who loved her refusing to be moved. I've had people ask me, friends, my sister, even my doctor once, whether I regret how I handled things, whether I should have just stayed quiet, given them what they wanted, kept the peace, and here's what I say. I kept the peace for 3 years. I kept it so hard I could barely hear myself think. The peace didn't protect my relationship with my granddaughter. The peace didn't make Paige feel more secure or Owen feel less exhausted. All the peace did was make me smaller and smaller until I was showing up at their house with a casserole and being told I was in the way. The trust fund wasn't a weapon. It was a line, a quiet, legal, irrevocable line that I drew around something I loved. And here's the thing about drawing lines. Sometimes it's the first honest thing you've said in years. Gerald would have understood. I know he would have. And sometimes late at night when the house is very quiet and I can almost hear him in the next room. I think he's proud of me. Hazel is talking in full sentences now. She knows where I keep the animal crackers. She drags me to the backyard to show me bugs and flowers and interesting rocks that only she can see the value in. Last week she told me a story about a bird. Completely made up, total nonsense, beautifully confident, and she wanted me to tell it back to her 3 times in a row. I did. I would do it 300 times. That's why I drew the line, that right there. If you're watching this and you're a grandmother or a mother or anyone who has ever loved someone so much you'd drive 40 minutes in the rain with a casserole, comment the city you're watching from. I want to know where you are. I want to know there are more of us out there, steady and quiet and holding on. Thank you for being here with me tonight. I've thought a lot about why things unfolded the way they did. Not to assign blame. I'm too old for that and too tired. But because I genuinely wanted to understand it. And what I keep coming back to is this. The way we treat people has weight. It accumulates. Every dismissal, every scheduled 2-hour window. Every time someone is made to feel like a burden in a relationship they built with love. That weight goes somewhere. It doesn't disappear. It just waits. Paige wasn't a villain. I want to be clear about that, even now. She was a woman who felt threatened by something she couldn't quite name, and instead of sitting with that discomfort, she tried to manage it. She managed me. She managed Owen. She managed the visits and the phone calls, and eventually she tried to manage a trust fund she had no legal right to touch. And each time she reached for more control, she moved further from the thing she actually needed, which was just to feel secure. That's the part that took me a long time to see. Her behavior wasn't about me. It was about her. And Owen's exhaustion wasn't about weakness. It was about a man who loved 2 people and didn't know how to hold both of them without losing one. What I know now, that I didn't fully know then, is that dignity is not something you can hold on to by being agreeable. I was agreeable for 3 years. I followed the rules, kept the peace, showed up with casseroles and bitten tongues and 2-hour Sunday windows. And I shrank. Not because anyone forced me. Because I allowed it. I confused keeping quiet with being wise. They aren't the same thing. The trust wasn't an act of anger. I need you to understand that. When I sat down with Harriet and we built that document, I wasn't thinking about Paige. I was thinking about Gerald. About a Wednesday morning when Hazel was 40 minutes old and smelled like something brand new. About the kind of woman I wanted my granddaughter to know when she was old enough to ask questions about where she came from and who loved her first. Setting up that trust was the first fully honest thing I had done in years. And the honesty had a cost. It created friction. It frightened people. It forced a conversation that everyone had been avoiding. But on the other side of that friction was Owen sitting in my backyard for 3 hours telling me the truth. Was Paige at my kitchen table saying she had been unfair? Was Hazel saying Gamma-Fran and falling asleep on my shoulder at her own birthday party? None of that happens if I stay small. That's the thing about drawing a line. Not a loud line, not a cruel one, just a quiet, clear, irrevocable one. It asks the people around you to decide who they actually want to be. Owen decided he wanted to be a son and a husband both, not a man slowly disappearing in the middle. Paige decided slowly that she wanted a real family more than she wanted control of one. And I decided that the most loving thing I could do for Hazel, for Owen, for even Paige, was to stop pretending that being diminished was the same as being gracious. Hazel knows where I keep the animal crackers now. She drags me outside to look at bugs. She tells me made-up stories about birds and expects me to repeat them back perfectly. I do, every single time. That's what I was protecting. That was worth every hard conversation, every document, every moment of standing firm when it would have been so much easier to fold.